Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I wanted to focus on a short story about rattlesnakes and marital troubles. I am referring to Sweat by Zora Neale Hurston. I think a lot of people have heard of Zora Neale Hurston, as she is one of the more well-known Black authors in the history of American and Black literature. But for those who don't know, Zora Neale Hurston was a writer who lived between the late 1800s and around 1960. She wrote a lot, quite a bit. She wrote short stories and books and essays, as well as research papers. She wrote about voodoo in African cultures and stuff like that. She often wrote about the African American experience or the Black experience in general. Unfortunately, her work was not appreciated in her time. She didn't really sell a lot, and critics didn't pay much note to her work. Unfortunately, that was the experience for Black authors of her time. And even today, that's still a problem for Black authors. So, fortunately, after her death, Alice Walker, pointed to her literature and said, "Hey, this is good. We should probably be talking about this." And that led to a rise of people reading her work, which include "Their Eyes Were Watching God," which is a book that's on my reading list. So it's something that I have to check out in the very near future. That was also turned into a movie, so a lot of her work has been turned into TV and movies after her death, which is good that some people appreciate her work after the fact. I am interested in reading more from Zora Neale Hurston just because I've heard her name before, and I feel like I should be checking out some of her work, especially with the title like "Their Eyes Were Watching God." That has to be good on some level. So, also of note, something that struck out to me is she was married and divorced 3 different times in her life, within the same 15 years, it would seem. Like that seems significant because it's. I think it might have been like infused in her work somewhere, especially in this story with about marital troubles. And there might have been some influences from her own life seeping into her work, or maybe I'm just reading too far into this. But yeah, without further ado, let's talk about Zora Neale Hurston, a pretty interesting author. I'll do a little summary of Sweat, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. So Sweat focuses on a married couple. Delia primarily focuses on her. She is a washwoman who frequently washes the clothes for white individuals in her community. That's how she makes money. She's the only money maker in her household. And it also focuses on her husband, Sykes, who is unemployed and an adulterer, kind of not a good individual. He frequently threatens to abuse and torment his own wife. So the story kind of starts with Delia doing the washing the clothes, getting a start on her work, when her husband comes in and sets his bullwhip upon her, and that terrorizes her because she thinks it's a snake at first, and she's terrified of snakes. Her husband just laughs this off and then questions why she's doing the work, why she brought these white people's clothes into his house, and she points out that she has to do it just to get a head start on the work because it is quite a bit of work. She defends herself by saying that she's not going to put up with his behavior for much longer, and that she's the only one bringing money into the household. And at that point, Sykes leaves, and eventually Delia leaves the house as well to go about their business. And the story kind of shifts perspectives to some people in the community who are talking about Delia and Sykes, how they were in love at first, but eventually their marriage kind of soured, and they can't seem to stand each other. And Sykes even publicly cheats on Delia with a woman named Bertha, because they note that he likes a bigger woman, or something like that. And like Delia even sees Sykes doing this. It seems like a way for him to find the love that he wants, but also a way to torment his own wife, because then she's got to deal with the fact that, what, am I not good enough for the man I married anymore? What's up with that? Delia goes back home, and then her husband shows up with a cage that holds a rattlesnake, which scares his wife. And at this point, she's like, "I've had enough. I'm not going to go to the same church you're going at anymore." Like, she doesn't want to her marriage. She doesn't want to go to church and lie to God with her husband anymore. So she decides to go to a completely different church, which puts off her husband. And like, again, this is her defending herself, and he would much rather her be docile and take this verbal abuse rather than stick up for herself in any kind of way. There's that big fight with Delia telling Sykes that if he physically abuses her one more time, she's going to go tell the white people, which seems to be a big threat, like maybe a promise that like this will actually be like a big punishment for him, which, given the history of people of color and white individuals, especially in the justice system, seems like it would be. And so Sykes leaves, and Delia goes to church. And when she comes back to church later, she goes to do the wash again when she encounters a rattlesnake in the wash bin, pretty clearly indicating that Sykes tried to murder her at this point by putting the rattlesnake, a venomous animal, into the wash bin. Delia manages to escape the house. In the process, the wind from her rushing out blows out all the candles, and she resides on like a hay bale in order to escape from the rattlesnake. Meanwhile, Sykes returns, but there's no light in the house, and so he goes and tries to find a match. But unfortunately, he used up all of his matches at Bertha's place. And the rattlesnake bites him, and despite his efforts to fight off the rattlesnake, he gets bitten, and he's poisoned, and unfortunately he dies. And Delia hears him, and the story ends with her going to rest under a tree with the knowledge that Sykes will soon be dead, and that's where it ends. In terms of analysis, there is a bit to talk about with this story. The first thing to talk about is that of the failed marriage, the marriage gone sour, that is prevalent throughout the story. The multiple people note, especially even Delia in her thoughts, that this was a marriage that was filled with love at one point, but it was that love was slowly replaced by anger and abuse and frustration with another person. There's a good quote that I would like to read to you there. "She lay awake, gazing upon the debris that cluttered their matrimonial trail. Not an image left standing along the way. Anything like flowers had long ago been drowned in the salty stream that had been pressed from her heart. Her tears, her sweat, her blood. She had brought love to the union, and he had brought a longing after the flesh. 2 months after the wedding, he had given her the first brutal beating. She had the memory of his numerous trips to Orlando with all of his wages when he had returned to her penniless, even before the first year had passed. She was young and soft then, but now she thought of her knotty, muscled limbs, her bared, her harsh, knuckly hands, and drew herself up into an unhappy little ball in the middle of the big feather bed. Too late now to hope for love. Even if it were not Bertha, it would be someone else. The case differed from the others only in that she was bolder than the others. Too late for everything except her little home. She had built it for her old days, and planted one by the trees and flowers there. It was lovely to her, lovely." And so right there, you get how Delia just feels that the marriage, it's passionless now. Like they've both kind of given up on one another. With Delia kind of seeing that there's no hope in changing Sykes. He's going to cheat on her, and Sykes just openly cheating on her, not even caring whether about community stigma, which seems like a big deal at the time. And Delia has to deal with that fact. Like, she seems to only be the only one dealing with the unfortunate nature of this failed marriage, where it's having an effect on her mental health, and the only thing she can really turn to at this point in time is God. Possibly why she hasn't left the marriage, because if she's religious or something like that, then divorce might be taboo where she's from, and it's much better to stick out the marriage than to deal with the social stigma and the religious stigma in that case. But as the story progresses, you see that it's reached a point where, like, both of them are wishing death upon one another. Like, Delia just wishes that Sykes would go away, and Sykes, like, he physically abuses Delia to the point where like, she has to defend herself with pots and pans. And, like, at one point near the end of the story, like, Sykes even tries to poison her with a rattlesnake, clearly an attempt to kill her. Like, not only is it wishing death upon her, but has reached the point where he's gonna try to kill her. And Delia, for her part, like, she doesn't try to save Sykes at all. Like, maybe she realizes that it would be too late to take him to the hospital after getting eaten by a rattlesnake, but she doesn't even try to save him. Like, she just goes to rest under the tree. It's clear that, like, the marriage has turned to a point where it's so dark and so, like, scary. It's two people who no longer love each other. It's the complete opposite of beautiful matrimony, which I think is pretty wonderful on Hurston's part, like, to portray marriage that has become so dark and sad. Like, it's wonderful writing. Again, I do have to wonder if this is influenced on some part with her own life, because she was not in a happy marriage. She struggled with all three of her relationships. Maybe some influences in her life on her writing. Another element of the story that I like that is very prevalent is that of irony. There's a pretty clear-cut case of irony in this situation. Two instances, I would say. The first is Sykes tries to kill his wife by using a rattlesnake, and in effect, he is bitten by that rattlesnake when he comes home, and he dies. So he was killed in the same way that he was trying to kill his wife, which I feel is irony, a good example of that. But there's also another case of irony. He tried to pull out some matches in order to see around the house, in order to, possibly find the rattlesnake before it bit him, and it turns out that he used up all of his matches at Bertha's, which feels like, another case of irony, in that his cheating in effect killed him in the end. His cheating prevented him from being able to save his own life in the end. Maybe not so much irony, but it's just an interesting element of this story. And his own rage couldn't even save him, because he fought against the rattlesnake at the very end of the story, and it's which I think is pretty interesting, because, like, he used all that rage against Delia, and it was effective in tormenting her. But that rage didn't save him from the snake. The snake still bit him and ended up in his death. The last thing I want to talk about is the colloquial language that Hurston uses in this story. I'm not a fan of it, just because it's hard to read. Like, in some cases, colloquial language is okay, but I think Zora Neale Hurston overdoes it in this case, and a lot of the times the story becomes hard to read, and like, the only people who might be able to effectively read it are those from the culture in which she's describing, Southern Black culture, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So very specific language, and she kind of overdoes it. Like, I guess it's authentic, but at the same time, it does make the story hard to read. So a delicate balance that Zora Neale Hurston doesn't quite land right there, but I don't think it hurts the story, but again, it does make it hard to read. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Sweat by Zora Neale Hurston, a pretty wonderful short story about marital discord and an unfortunate case of irony at the end of the story. I really enjoyed it. I loved Zora Neale Hurston's writing, especially getting at the mental trauma that Sykes had inflicted upon Delia, and how she justified just leaving Sykes in his moment of need. pretty interesting, and especially for its time to be able to show something so harsh and cold is pretty significant in my opinion. I definitely recommend that you go check it out. You can find it online. I'll post a link to it in the description. If you have something to say about the story, if you read it before, you want to comment, if you want to tell me, maybe your interpretation of what Hurston is trying to say, comment below. I would love to hear from you. Let's have a discussion about this interesting short story. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about Zora Neale Hurston and her wonderful writing. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your unusual and rattlesnakey travels. Farewell.